Well, thank you so much, Wendy, for being with me today on the WaveCapital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. You're my 79th guest. How are you today, Wendy?
I'm doing well. 79. That's impressive. Congratulations, Garrett. I'm so delighted to be on your show today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wendy. It's a pleasure having you on and speaking with you today about what relationship building means to you and what does it mean for your professional career and what has it meant for your professional career. You're a registered dietitian, nutritionist, doctor of public health. You graduated from Tufts University and you received your master's degree from the University of California, San Diego. And for the past 15 years, what was at the time Regis and Kelly is now, many years later, Kelly and Mark, and you are their nutritionist expert. And so I look forward to speaking with you about your experiences and what it's been like, working on the show, but also being able to express and to share your wisdom and knowledge and insight. So, my first question, as I mentioned, what does relationship building mean to you and what has it meant for your professional career?
Well, it turns out it's meant everything. I sort of knew this, but you don't know it until you put it to practice. When I think about relationships, I think about connection, and it's a word that I use all the time, connecting. And in a social sense, sure, but it's something that's essential to humankind and something that I even teach about. But a relationship is not one person. We're not built to do life alone. So the idea that a relationship is a topic of conversation and it's so important to us is so key because we live in relationships and how we foster those is certainly important. So one of the main premises that I sort of act on is the power of we instead of me in the entire world, and try to keep that front and center when I'm sort of working professionally, when I'm working personally, in my most recent endeavor, which is sort of my place to share this even more widely, is I have a podcast called 1000 Waking Minutes. And the whole idea is that our life's currency, our minutes every day, are out there to be well lived. And wellness being one of the terms, but well could be like abundant and happy and fulfilled and in connection with our other people, our community, and our globe, so all of the things. But it's also been shown in research. So I have such a heavy emphasis in research, which we'll probably dabble in today, Garrett. But relationships through volunteerism, through our work, entrepreneurship, through mentorship, they're not just good for society to move on, but they're good for our mood, they're good for our health, our longevity, our heart. They literally have physiological benefits to doing this, and that's why I'm invested in it. So that's in short, but we can dive into the thick of it as we progress.
No, I love that. What a wonderful explanation. Talking about power of we, currency of minutes. It's all about how we choose our time wisely and working with the people who can help us achieve our goals, our dreams, our aspirations. And like I always say, relationship building is the essence of humanity. And with relationship building, truly, it's not cliche, but truly all things are possible in our personal and professional lives. And as a human race, we are goal oriented, and especially in the United States, in American culture, there's a lot of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial values that we share and focus on here in the States. And, we live in a capitalistic society, but we also live in a society where we have a history of Judeo Christian values and we have a history of giving back to the community in a philanthropic humanitarian format. So, when you
Right.
think of your career, what made you want to pursue nutrition, health and wellness, the culinary arts? Would love to learn more.
As I've shared with others, and I'm excited to share today with you, it's been a long and windy path. I have to admit that freely. Turns out I'm good in science. I've loved food and nutrition science for a long, long time, but it was a hobby before it became a career. And really, it started in sort of the liberal arts and communication. So, just a little tiny bit about the backstory on that because it's relevant to my degrees that I sort of meandered through over the course of time. I went to Tufts University, which is renowned for nutrition. If people look up going to school for nutrition, is likely that Tufts will be on the list. It may be a priority for some, it may be somewhere else, but Tufts is one of the premier nutrition institutions. but I didn't go to Tufts for nutrition. I went there I sort of did on the periphery. Let me put it that way. I went there to get a very liberal arts diversified education. I thought it was really important then, and I thought that that kind of scholastic environment could give me the best of that. But sincerely, I was sort of ambitious high schooler who was like looking for certain features. The nutrition part came that Jean Mayer, who had advised many presidential administrations on nutrition policy, he was the president of Tufts at the time. And I sort of like idolized this guy. I don't know why a high schooler would, be enthusiastic about this, but I was reading up. And at the time, I was sort of a practicing vegetarian. I'd already followed a plant-based diet, plant-based diet, it's a little wider, cast the net wider since that time, but I was a practicing vegetarian at the time. And what fascinated me about Tufts, in addition to the, great academics and the diverse minds I would be engaged with, was that they had salad bars in the dormitory cafeteria. And I was going to be put on a meal plan. And I thought that that was just so cool. And it was said, I don't know, I have never verified this. I just took it at carte blanche, but it was said that that was the first university, may or may not be. They probably paralleled with some others, but the first university to have salad bars, at the time, which was new, a new concept in the dormitory cafeteria. And I just thought, wow, the world of food, is opening up to me, the world of these plants, the world of a wonderful, varied, colorful vegetarian diet, because I love to eat it, not because of all the stuff I've learned since or that I can teach about. And that was sort of the start of it. And I took a ton of nutrition courses, none of which counted way back, then for my 10 years later when I went to get a doctoral degree in the field. So I had to backtrack a lot, but it started paving the path. And I graduated, surprisingly, maybe, with Spanish language and literature as my major, with a minor in Latin American studies, which really ties now very closely to what I do, which is communicate with others about nutrition, which came later as a professional degree. And I do it in English, I do it in Spanish, I do it professionally, I do it with clients. And I've learned that the whole world is about relationships. So it broadened my eyes and my perspective to other cultures as well. We're better together, the synergies that happen, whether it's nutrient synergies, which I'd be happy to talk about with you,
Yes, please.
what they do and bring, how does two nutrients come together, make even more, but also it happens with people. A mentee and a mentor make bigger than just the collaborative two. It makes bigger. And I think in the end, it becomes that momentum or snowball effect of starting to pay attention to where, your windy path goes, which then led to some other steps. But I'll stop there unless prime me to go into others. I'd be happy to go into the next steps. But that's how it sort of started. I was a good eater. I happened to be good at science. I sort of was on the fringe of, dabbling in the space and curious on how it impacted my body. I was an athlete growing up, playing soccer on the boys team when there was no girls team, up to be competitive, rowed on the Charles River in college, in crew. And so I also wanted to fuel my body. So the nutrition part was sort of like personalized at the time. I'll, admit it wasn't outward facing and educational. It was sort of, an interest, self-serving as a teenager might be at the time, self-serving, but interest, real keen interest.
Well, that's great. And I love the fact that you're walking me through all of these steps and, even going back to, life as a college student. And when you think about your mentors, along the way at Tufts, at UC San Diego, and talk to me about who you looked up to, who you admired to shape your career path.
Yeah, thanks, Garrett. I think about my mentors a lot, and formal and informal. So in life, we all have various mentors. And I've been known, even when I'm giving a professional talk or presentation, to bring postcards, because if this topic comes up, I often will say, now might be the time, if you haven't recently, to express some gratitude. I'll pay the postage, but you can come up and get a postcard and write a thank you to your mentor. If you're thinking, if someone springs to mind, because we have so many along the path. And sometimes, they ebb and flow, they come in and out of our lives. I have so many, but I would be remiss to, to not mention or start at college, and there were those. But my first grade math teacher was a mentor, and I still know her family. And she just recently passed at 101 years of age. So talk about perseverance on life.
Absolutely.
And she was absolutely a mentor, Mrs. Ferris, who was in, first grade. The impact that you can have on a child early on. Our teachers are really the most, they're informal, formalized, they're professional, but not sort of the type of mentor that we think of in the business model. But it's really good to think of our teachers that way, like the teachers that impact you.
Of
There
course.
was a guidance counselor along the way that was a friend of the family, not related to my schooling or anything. I grew up in Connecticut and he was in Maryland, and he was actually a guidance counselor at a high school there who was just took an interest through our family and for me. And, he came up to high school when I graduated from high school from Maryland. He came up to Boston when I graduated from Tufts. He stuck with me and sort of helped me navigate as not a parent, not a formal teacher, but someone who showed interest. And I have so many. I have one who's 103. I've got some centenarians in my back pocket,
That's
who's a
amazing
mentor
to say
who's,
that you have mentors that, who have lived that long and seen over 100 years of life.
yeah. And they're, one is a godmother of, of wellness, frankly. I mean, she's still active. She started another foundation. I've worked with her for over 28 years, but she started a foundation at the age of 100. When she passed the 100 mark, she started a
Wow.
new foundation. So, I mean, I think that, it's about, for me, it's been a series of different players who come into my life, and some stay, as we know. Some mentees have become mentors to me. And I think that's the greatest kind, is when you can collaborate and be the champion of other people's goals and come to find how wonderful it can be beyond. And then one day, they're your mentor, and that's a full circle.
Well, that's truly incredible. And, you have explained who these mentors are and what they've meant to you. So when you think about specifically characteristics and personality traits that you value in these mentors, and, my podcast, I interview you and all my other guests, and all of you are elite relationship builders. So I consider you an elite relationship builder. And from your perspective, do you consider yourself an elite relationship builder? Because I am, interviewing you, and that's why I identified you as well as so many others to be on my podcast. But do you feel that you have matured in your career as an elite relationship builder, or do you feel like there's still more things that you want to accomplish?
A lot more I want to accomplish. First of all, thank you for saying that. I will accept the compliment, because that's also something I think that some of us are reluctant to do. Thank you for saying that to me.
You're
I
welcome.
don't think of myself that way, however, but I thank you for that. And not that I don't think that I've come to a certain place where I feel comfortable talking to you and educating and being before and accepting mentees, for example, or bringing my expertise to a board or a group. But I think what I've learned, and there's a lot more to learn and that I want to do, but I've learned that some of the key characteristics that I've admired in my mentors and I try to foster is the ability, number one, to listen to others, just listen, take things in, don't prepare an answer before you've taken it all in. Curiosity, like constant curiosity. It not only is it okay to ask questions, but it should be cherished to wonder in the best of ways. We have it in my daughter's room. We have, I wonder, dot, dot, dot. And it's every bit of like, I wonder about the world. The world is wonder. It's the question marks of the day. The word wonder to me speaks volumes. But some of those things about being independent, but humble, recognizing that sometimes the quietest voices in the rooms are the most important players on a team, and sort of fostering that environment and sort of seeing the language that they like to be spoken to in, or how you best can communicate and connect. And I don't know, I'm meandering a little bit here because you sort of caught me off guard with being elite, but I appreciate that.
Elite meaning
It's all those
excellent,
things. Yeah.
or
Excellent.
going
Yeah.
above and beyond. I mean,
Yeah.
because, as we discuss in our interview, and my audience will understand where this interview is going with my next few questions. But, looking at your career, I mean, you are highly educated, having gone to college, graduate from college, getting a master's degree, and then being a registered dietitian nutritionist and a doctor of public health. So, what do those degrees mean to you? And you were also awarded the Chancellor's Award. So, would love for you to share with us what the Chancellor's Award means to you.
Thank you.
I think that is something notable to discuss.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'm a lifetime learner, lifelong learner, as many of us, probably most of the individuals that you interview are. I happen to like, pursuing the academic environment for whatever reason. I'd like to do it again, should the opportunity present. So the sort of formalized degrees, what I liked about those is that I liked having a path and a trajectory to follow. I liked having boxes to tick. I like the organization because my mind is very big and creative processing. So sometimes having an organizational structure teaches certain values, teaches you how to learn, how to engage with others, all of those. So each of those in their own. Tufts, I got my start, that's my bachelor's degree. I said Spanish language and literature. And today I work actively every single week in Spanish, and it is not my first language by a long shot. And here we are. My master's degree was so important for me because it really opened my eyes to the world. My master's degree is from UC San Diego, and that degree was a multidisciplinary degree, still not in the health sciences, indirectly by the time I got to my thesis, but it was in Latin American studies, and it afforded me the opportunity to learn how, as I got focused on, food and nutrition or health and well-being, moreover, how so many things come to impact those, from our social, our cultural, our economics, our politics, our anthropological, all these pieces come to focus on the thing we do 3 times a day or more, which is eating in the case of nutrition. And it allowed me, I received a research grant to live in Northeast Brazil, one of the poorest, most poor communities I got to do research in, on a public health breastfeeding campaign in 5 hours interior in Northeast Brazil back in the 90s. And it was a street theater group that was grassroots teaching from within. What that degree ultimately all came to the pass. One, I gained another language, which was Portuguese. I'm functional, not fluent in that, but I gained that. But I started to see that, we don't have all the answers here in the United States either. And I'm not bad mouthing us at all. I'm saying that the world, it opened my eyes at the time that some of the best solutions come from other perspectives where things are different, and things were very, very different there. And so I think that that really helped me learn about not only interdisciplinary practice and relationship building, but how to communicate to people that don't have the same living truth, living history as I do, for a lot of different reasons, but that there are some universal and overlapping truths as well. And then getting into my doctoral degree, I went to Loma Linda University, which has been renowned for, in its own, categories for a long, long time. It was the first baboon heart transplant happened at Loma Linda, one of the premier pediatric hospitals, one of the first proton treatment centers for cancer. It's a vegetarian campus, which is very unusual because it's affiliated, it's a Seventh-day Adventist learning institution, which is not my personal religion, but that was part of the tenets of the university. Now people know Loma Linda a little bit more because it's considered a blue zone, the only blue zone with the highest long livers, because of the various health habits they follow, but the only one in the United States. The others are in Costa Rica and in Sardinia and Mediterranean, like those areas. And Loma Linda now is known as a blue zone. There, what I loved about it, it was hardcore science, like a lot of science, but public health also. So the public health is a science, epidemiology and observational, and get in the community health. But it also has a real international focus. And so again, I was able to be exposed to people from all over the world, various places, various thinking, and they came together. But because I am a little geeky about my academics, the Chancellor's Award came to pass because of academic excellence. So it was a feather in my cap. It's the highest award, I guess, that they offer to their students. They choose a student. So when I graduated with my doctoral degree with honors, highest honors, I was given this, and my understanding is a committee comes together and they grant it. So it's huge recognition, certainly. It's great resume, validation. But it for me, I took it also as a challenge, like now I need to uphold that. And fortunately, since that time, we all have lots of failures underneath every success. But I have been, awarded some recognition. And one of my proudest ones recently, I was given a Distinguished Lecturer Award by my academy, which represents over 100,000 individuals. And I was invited to give a keynote address before our major annual conference. And I was able to entitle that, Garrett, Better Together. And I was able to bring some of these very concepts to life, which was a proud moment for me in the last couple of years.
Congratulations. I mean, that's truly exciting and incredible that, you look at your, experiences with fondness and, your resume speaks for itself. The awards that you've received are truly, remarkable and also well deserved. And I appreciate you sharing that with my audience and me because I hope that it inspires not only me, which it does, but also my listeners and viewers at home. And so, being a public health expert and being someone who had to spend a lot of time in Brazil, how much of that was a culture shock, comparing life here in America with, Brazil, which is obviously in South America and the biggest country in South America, and, noted about Portuguese because in Brazil, that's their main language is Portuguese. So you're learning languages, new languages as well. But how much of that was a culture shock, and what did you learn about public health globally in Brazil that, to your point earlier, America or public health officials in America don't know everything, but obviously we're one of the main leaders in the public health, across the public health spectrum, if you will. So just curious what you learned being down in Brazil.
Yeah. So to answer your culture shock, definitely, but it was an enthusiastically invited, naive, but welcome, like bring it on. I really didn't realize that about myself and going in, but in reflection, that was my personality. So I was enthusiastic about it, but wow, very, very different on so many levels. And I think maybe that's what makes me a scientist is I really love the ability to not say what's this is different than this, but to observe, and I think science is about observation of whatever it is, behavior, molecules, foods, nutrients, whatever that is. And when I was able to go there, I'm pretty adaptable into like put me in a space and I don't need a lot. Do I like things? Yes, certain way. Sure, I do. But, put me in another space. I'm like, I could do this too. That was my nature, that I've learned to be able to articulate later. But I also sort of had my imaginary notepad out and I was sort of taking notes. I'm a note taker, like, wow, this is how they do it here. Oh, this is another way that's different. Or, oh, we do it similar and this is how it is. Wow, I wish sometimes we had something like this. Oh, I never imagined that the grocery store could have 5 options, not 60, and that it makes decision fatigue a little bit less for a consumer. So it's impacted me in a million ways. And the culture shock was tremendous at the beginning, but I sort of embraced it. What I learned about sort of public health is, and I think we're in a more advanced stage, and there's people much better than I at being able to critique the holes and gaps and all that. But what I would like to share is that at the time when I went, there wasn't the same kind of world of web. There wasn't Google and, let alone AI. There were people in rooms thinking about those things. But what you could see was what was presented to you. Let me put it that way. The
Sure.
world was as the books told it, as the news told it in your area, and as you sought, went out seeking the International Herald Tribune versus your local paper. And so for me, a lot was eye-opening, as you can only imagine. Today, I think that some of those can be bridged at the student level. I was in grad school, so I was thinking like this. I had been exposed to certain media rooms and that kind of thing. But just being sort of on the ground and seeing that grassroots really works. Sometimes red tape and bureaucracy does really hang you up and you just got to go in there and get it done. But you can't be, guerrilla marketing about it, guerrilla public health about it. There are systems, but systems work differently in different places. And I think that those are just a few nuggets of how, it was jarring on the one hand, exciting in so many ways. And it was a little bit of a different era than we're able to consciously evaluate from the comfort of our desk these days. But nothing beats being there in person because back to relationships, if you can't touch, and I so love our conversation, but I hope we meet sometime in person. We're sort of two-dimensional still with each other
Sure.
today. And there's something so much more dynamic about being on the ground with the human.
Absolutely. Well, my wife and I, we love California. I have family in Pasadena, right outside of LA. My wife works for a Silicon Valley based company. And in my previous role, when I was the managing partner and chief development officer of WaveCapital Partners, and that's the company I previously was at, I named my podcast after, but I would do business in California a lot. And my wife and I will be celebrating our fifth wedding anniversary. It's officially December 12th, 2020. So the 5-year mark is coming up, but we're going to be celebrating a little bit earlier for a week out in California. We're going to go to Catalina Island. We're going to go to Newport Beach. My cousin's getting married in Los Angeles. So if you happen to be in the area first week of October in the Orange County area or the LA area, yeah, perhaps we could meet, because I do have a lot of connections out there and I love California. I think it's the way of the future. I mean, it always been ahead of the curve. And because it's a state that's so entrepreneurial, the fourth largest economy in the world, the birthplace of innovation and creativity. And not to say that places like New York or Chicago and other major cities across the country, Boston, which that's where you went to Tufts, right? And Boston
Yeah.
is a medical research based city. But when you think of California, it's a unique vibe and it's known for so many incredible things in research and development, R&D. And so when you think about your clients, and feel free to be on a no names basis, but just asking the question in the general sense, when you think about the type of clients you have and the type of research that you've done, talk to me and my audience about what you value in a client and how you help from a consultancy standpoint, with a strategic mindset and from a health and wellness nutritionist mindset. Would love to learn more.
Yeah, my clients, I think that to categorize them broadly, they really are so many different. I tap, or call them that. They're individuals, they're groups, businesses, and then there's sort of a wider audience, so to speak. I'm putting that in air quotes who, for those who may be just listening, audience who I may not ever know personally, but hope to have a moment of connection with through something that I might be doing, educating, sharing, helping perhaps in their lives. And the greatest thing about the clients I've worked with, so I do private practice. I work with individuals, families, actors, and celebrities, which seem noteworthy, but sports elites. I work with Ironman triathletes, and we've been to Kona and done some of these things. But the greatest thing about it has been, again, the relationships that come from it, and whether they say that helped me. Like even when I'm doing a national television segment, it's the one person who reaches out, who says, "Hey, I love that tip. Could I get the recipe?" Or, "Hey, I had this thought," or, "My mom said," just some point of connection, because that's why I do it. Is I'm in this field to help others. It's a helping profession and it fulfills me too. I mean, that helps me directly, indirectly, however you want to do that. There's science to show that too, how you benefit from helping others. But the goal with the types of clients, whether they're athletes, they're teenagers who are aspiring and trying to do something in their own sport, whether they're retiring or moving from a profession, or CEO leaders and executives who are trying to not only frame their own personal but family health, but want an entire, like, sort of corporate wellness model or a language built. I see that both as a challenge and an opportunity to be able to have the topic of well-being and real evidence-based practices, real conversation, and translated to practical tips. So The client is the person, the commodity group. Sometimes I work with big agricultural groups on trying to share the news about how cool they are, their nutrition, and what they do for our diet and where they fit. It really varies, and I consider those all my clients, and they vary, I call them all VIP in that way, and so no names are even needed because now you know who my clients are.
Well, no, I appreciate that. I'm wanted to be respectful of what is considered to be, privileged information between you and your client. So I appreciate you sharing for public consumption. But that really is
Can I tell you something funny, Garrett? The one thing about client confidentiality, it's been so locked into me, and I've joked with some of my friends over time with it. It's so locked in that if someone shares something with me, maybe hopefully I make a good friend because of this also, that I do that so innately. I've been trained into it, and it's just who I am. That sometimes one of my other friends won't know something that they should have known, like about the dinner plan that we all made because I didn't share it with my husband, yet or something because they didn't share it, giving me the green light to share it. So I'm like, well, it's not mine to share until, till I'm either told to share it. And sometimes we have laughs over that, but and I'd rather be on that side of it than the other. So anyway, just a funny aside that came to mind.
no, I appreciate you sharing that. And in my previous role, it was where when we represented clients, you have a fiduciary relationship with your client, so or
Right.
your client. So it's you're a fiduciary, if you will, to your clients too. That
Yeah.
being a confidant and having that trust factor, and
Yeah.
so that matters to you, obviously, and that certainly matters to me too. And I wanted to also talk to you about your experience for the past 15 years being the nutritionist expert. It started out as Regis Philbin and Kelly Ripa, but before that was, Regis Philbin, Kathleen Gifford. But I believe that when you started, it was maybe the final year with Regis and Kelly. And now, all the way now, 15 years later to present day, it's Kelly and Mark, her husband, Mark Consuelos. He grew up in Tampa like me, so there's that Tampa, Florida connection. But, Kelly has also partnered with Michael Strahan and Ryan Seacrest and a lot of other people who have filled in to do the show, and you've worked with all of them in these nutritionist style segments, and Ali Wentworth, George Stephanopoulos' wife. So what could you tell me about your experience? How did you get involved with the Kelly and Mark, or at the time Regis and Kelly franchise, and being the go-to person in nutrition? How did you get connected with that group? And obviously you have been a mainstay, and it's stood the test of time 15 years later, and would love to hear your remarkable story.
Yeah, thank you. I think when that all happened, and I've had the wonderful opportunity, as you clearly in your show, to interact with many wonderful colleagues, professionals, of celebrity, meaning that other people really know of them or they're very present in our public life. And I'll get to how I started there in a second. But what I've treasured most about those relationships and cherished was their professional, like why I go back also. I'm invited back because I hope I bring this also. But why I love going back is because they're collaborative, service oriented, resilient, adaptable. They move with time and change. I mean, you look at the show and it's a mainstay feature, the most watched show in morning television, and it's always positive, and they've got the sharpest hosts, Kelly Ripa being one of the smartest and funny, but smartest people I've met over time, and the whole family that is built around that show. That hopefully my hard work and their invitation and their amazingness, that we do good work together, and those are the qualities that I favor and I gravitate toward, and I try to attract and also move toward purposefully. A colleague of mine sort of introduced me. I had a book in that worked on a major global bestseller, very hard doing all the menus and recipes and meal plans for the first superfoods book, the one that literally put the word superfood on out. I mean, it wasn't a word before, Superfoods, the book. And I worked on that book. And it was around the time that I did the follow-up book to that, where I authored the Superfoods RX Diet book at the time. And it was a big success. And an opportunity came through a colleague and a connection with a producer. And then we created a great segment. And Regis, and I was on with Regis many times, and we have some funny old stories over that time. And then many since then with Kelly and her amazing co-hosts. She and we and the team found our groove. But I have to tell you, every time I work for them, I do more. I try to bring more of me to it. I never take those relationships for granted, never, ever, ever. And I try to bring my best now, because we evolve and we change and hopefully get better, my
Sure.
best now to them. And so that's how it started. And, our collaborative being real. I mean, I think the best thing, anyone can do is be authentic and try to figure out. It's a lifetime of figuring out, but being your authentic self, you can learn to be. And so, however that happened, we meld nicely together, and I've been invited back, and I will always do my best work, and hopefully we'll have a very, very continued long relationship together. But that's, I think, the way of all of our lives that we bring. That's certainly the most public facing of mine, and it's a place where, if a person or few reach back and say, "Hey, that mattered in my life." I do always try to think of serving, as an act of service, the show, obviously, but the viewers, which is ultimately why they're there as well. So who's there on the other side, and what might I bring for their well-being to them, including hopefully a little bit of a smile, because I think that show is just so joyous, in its foundation.
Absolutely, and that's why I reached out. I grew up watching that show. My mom loved
Mm.
watching it, my sister loved watching it. So I grew up watching that show when it was Regis Philbin and Kathy Lee Gifford. And how we connected. I thought to reach out to you on LinkedIn because I saw one of your most recent segments, and I saw the Armenian last
Thank you.
name, and I'm Armenian, but I know that's your married name. But before we get into your family and the dynamic and your Lithuanian culture and your husband's Armenian culture and how they both coexist and coincide, raising your family, the show obviously speaks to and why you come back is because a lot of relationship building is going on, and they made you feel comfortable over the years, and they wanted you back because they appreciated you. They appreciate your presence on the show, your words of wisdom, your insight, during the segments, the cooking segments, or talking about health and wellness, nutrition, public health. And I'm sure you got feedback from them and from fans and viewers alike. So it helped you even more so every time you've come on the last 15 years to bring your very best and to bring more of your personality because you got into a groove, you got into a rhythm, and they became a part of your professional family.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think the extension finally just came to me in the last couple of years in trying to think about another avenue to reach a wider audience, because my day to day, I'm reaching certain, I educate health professionals, I work in communication space, I work with specific entities and specific individuals. And I think that really, Garrett, sort of launched the idea, which took several years before I even starting a podcast, my 1000 Waking Minutes podcast, talking about this, because I'd been teaching about it for years. And I had gotten enough feedback saying, I connect to that. And, lo and behold, I learn all the things that you know how to do. And I'm still learning about how to tactically produce a podcast or a video podcast and that kind of thing. But it does allow me sort of an environment where I can create community that can be spread wider over time. And so that's made a difference, I think, in my current movement and evolution, certainly. And I think that that's been important in how I've been able to bring, like you said, my personality a little bit more. I mean, this topic, I mean, like this, your whole forum speaks and resonates so deeply with me. And I don't use resonate a lot because I feel like that's jargony word, but it really does resonate. This is an appropriate time to say it. It resonates because little backstory that, I wouldn't tell on a nutrition segment typically. But I have the ability over an interview or in my own show format. When I was 8 years old, I read everything I could. I got fascinated with Helen Keller. I was just fascinated. I just couldn't fathom the obstacles she overcame to be a great thinker and a great leader. I couldn't fathom the commitment of this teacher, Anne Sullivan. It just blew my 8-year-old mind about it. And I would read a book, and that was the era when I don't know if it's today because I haven't gotten there yet with my daughter, but third grade, we'd have to like do our first book report, do our first book-based diorama in the box, the shoebox, and do an oral story. We had to come report on books, and book after book, I was reading Helen Keller until the teacher finally put a kibosh on that and said, sorry, no more. Like, I appreciate your enthusiasm. I was reading like college level books, I like was reading everything I could find. She put
Yeah.
a stop, and I finally started telling this story recently. 3 books max on a subject interests, in third grade because of that. She stopped me after 8 or something like that. But the thing of it that resonated ultimately, little 8-year-old me did not know this. I wasn't a deep thinker at the time in that to that degree. But one of my very favorite quotes, I use it all the time, is alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. That's Helen Keller. I mean, air quotes, real quotes. She said that. She was not able to speak. She was not able to hear. And that's what she wrote. That's, what she learned. That's what she found. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. And so, today in this arena, that's what I can bring a little more of my own personality and my own experience. Because with time marches on, and days go on as you get older. Perhaps you get smarter if you allow yourself, or at least you have more experiences to build on. And that's where I'm at today.
I appreciate you saying all that, and I'm so glad you referenced Helen Keller. And it's such a brilliant thing that she said, and she was a very brilliant person. And despite her challenges and obstacles, I mean, she's one of the most recognizable people that we grew up learning about, and one of the most inspiring people. And I'm so glad for you to bring her up, because for my younger audience members who are listening who don't know who Helen Keller is, surely they should Google her name and learn all about her, because the fact that you bring Helen Keller up as someone who's inspired you, and I know that you said that you typically don't use the word resonate, but in the sense of like that it really, had a positive impact on you. I'm so glad you brought Helen Keller up. And, when you think about just the show, before I segue into your family, when you think of having the opportunity to work with Michael Strahan or Ryan Seacrest or Kelly Ripa, what are personality traits or character traits that you value? And then people think of their public persona and that they see on TV. But some of the conversations I'm sure you've had with them, in the green room or off camera, because they're probably asking you about, your life, or they're probably asking you about your family, or you're getting into the conversations about their life and their family, and things that not necessarily we would watch on a program like Kelly and Mark. So, you care to share with just some of the, stories that really meant a lot to you over the years of getting to know them on a more personal level, that, made you feel good and made them feel good.
I think really that for me, it's been about really authenticity. What you see on camera, for the most part, I mean, there's the showmanship of it, and then they cut camera and they have a live studio audience. And one of the hardest eras to do the show, and I was actually broadcasting the show from my kitchen, was during the pandemic. Was that we were all, there was no, and then for a period of time, no live studio audience. So their interaction for the sum total, whether it was in the green room, in front of a live studio audience, it was all similar. I mean, there's an extra something maybe when you're on camera doing the show. I'm going there, and I think the greatest thing that I've admired and respected with individuals in that kind of arena, and I would say that that's transcends into when I've worked with executives in the boardroom, or I've worked for not-for-profits and run committees or been part of those, is being on purpose, like being there, knowing what you're there to do while you're there, and so bringing your like best to the moment that you're there working. And when there's downtime, sort of connecting over humanity, human things, like what's for dinner, or how's your dog, or and meaning it, not trivial things, like, and probably back to what I said earlier about listening, so not just asking the question to be nice or to fill the gap at a commercial break or in the green room, but asking the question because you actually care to hear the answer. Maybe that's where I need to land this one. I think that that's been really, really impactful. It feels sort of like a family in that regard, and I think the best people in the world for me are the people who, you know, that when I ask a question, they believe that I'm here to I'm asking it because I wanna hear what they have to say, and it feels so good when you're on the receiving end of that too.
Yes, listening is so key. And, God gave us one mouth, but He gave us two ears. So there's a reason for that. And I love the fact that you brought up listening. In my 60th episode, I interviewed Joe Madden, who's a three-time Major League Baseball Manager of the Year, two-time World Series champion. And he mentioned listening as a real key part in relationship building. I mean, that was one of his final points. So I'm so glad that you brought up listening as well. And I was going to ask about the pandemic and the pivotal moment across our human existence. We had to live through the 2020 pandemic, and as a public health professional and expert like yourself, how did you react? You mentioned it even during the show, with Kelly and Mark, and
Mm.
how everybody had to adjust. How did you and your husband and child have to personally, deal with the pandemic? And I wanted to ask you about your podcast too. What was a defining moment or a pivotal moment of why you wanted to start your podcast? And did your podcast bring you a lot of new meaning having to live through the pandemic?
Yeah, well, great questions. You're diving deep here for my brain to think about. The pandemic for me and my family, it hit hard. Like every story from every person feels just as confounding and dramatic and unbelievable as the next. I feel like, I'm always trying to find not the silver lining, but the optimistic half full on while we're also talking about what went wrong. And I don't mean that this minute, I mean when it was happening. So people who found their bread baking skills, or 10 years, they say 10 years of sort of infighting between the grocery stores, whether we're going to go online or not, forced that moment, and now they're online. Like there were some hurdles that were overcome in an instant, and all the while, we lost contact, physical contact with individuals. A friend of mine who published about this said she felt like she was falling off the end of the world, like the world was ending. So many people, their lives were completely upended, disrupted, and they lost loved ones. So it was dramatic at every level. We weathered the storm relatively well, considering, but we live far from some of our close family members. We embraced the digital world despite having a young person we didn't want digital screen time for. And we came up with new ideas. And I really tried to pivot myself, saying, how do we connect? I started seeing, almost inevitable, like, will we ever shake hands again? Like I really, because in public health, you think of the things like, I just finished writing, and I'm sorry, I'm doing so many little dabbles. It's like bringing back all this flood of memories. I had just written a chapter about hand washing and how really important it was. I was going to convince you this time. And then the pandemic happened. I had to I was like, wow, that was really, I mean, great, but now that is not, even relevant to talk about because we know how critical that became in our lives. And yet we, as a humankind, we somehow, mustered the strength and came back together. The residual effects, I think, will be long lasting. And I think people are just starting to feel some of the stresses of like, can I hug? Do I need to mask? Some of these literal touch points on connection were really like silent wounds that many of us, isolation. How do you come out of that? How do you reconnect in person is something that we're all still contending with. We weathered it pretty well. I mean, all told, my daughter was home, my husband and I were home. We suffered like a lot of people. I'm an entrepreneur, so when, work dries up, and you've got financial stresses, and I suffered those as well. But then I had to buckle down and use some of the skills that I've been telling you about otherwise to hopefully rebound and come back stronger.
Well, I love that you talk about your resilience and you even talk about how the people on, Kelly and Mark, Kelly Ripa, Mark Consuelos, all of these people that they are resilient as well. So I love that we highlight resilience because everybody had to be resilient, during the pandemic. And, so many people in this country and around the world lost their lives. For those who survived and the wounds that they had to sustain, losing family members, friends, colleagues, maybe people they went to school with, or, you know, people who were lifelong friends, and then to have to endure all that. And it definitely changed our course of history of how, yes, we communicate and interact with each other. And I hope that the best days are ahead of us as a society. And for you and your family, I hope the best days are ahead of you and your family.
Thank
When you
you.
think about you as a public health professional, what advice would you give to people like me, my audience, people within your network? What advice would you give of how to best take care of yourself? And I know it might sound like a self-explanatory
Oh,
question
oh
to
no.
so,
Yeah, it's a great question to take care. How do we take care of ourselves, right? I think with loving hands, if we can at times, and that may, I'm not trivializing that. I'm going to describe that a little bit more. I think that life is awesome and it can be also very challenging to many of us. And our challenges shouldn't be measured on how hard someone else's challenges in relationship. Ours today, whatever you or I go through, is however hard it is because of how we perceive it at the moment. One of the things, and maybe this ties into why my podcast, it's just approaching a 1 year mark on it. I've been teaching about 1,000 waking minutes. So life's currency, I call it, because if you look at a day, and this is to answer, like, how do we take care of ourselves? We have 1,440 minutes in every day. And it's a great equalizer because you don't get more Garrett and me less. I get the same 1,440, we get them all the same. It doesn't matter if you're rich, you're poor, you're smart, you're not, you live in, Florida or California. We all have 1,440 minutes in a day if we get the sort of proposed optimal for health sleep a night. And I know that a lot of us, depending on where we are and what night it is, we may not get that. But if we get what research has shown, 7 to 8 hours that supports health, supports blood sugar, supports appetite, supports weight, supports all these things, if you subtract out those 7 to 8 hours, we're left with 1,000 waking minutes. That's the name of the podcast. It's in those 1,000 waking minutes that not every day is a spa day, just take it off, live like this is the last day on earth. But it's within those minutes that we can find our purpose, that we can do what we have to, like work, like errands, like commuting, like, the doldrum of life that's just the to do lists and whatnot. But it's also where we can carve and make time and use time for self-care and health promoting practices. And that's the whole thing. I mean, in a nutshell, that's it. I've worked for 20 plus years under the basic three principles: eat well, 6 words: eat well, move daily, be healthy. And if you're viewing this, I'll do it the other way: eat well, move daily, be healthy. In that order, reading order. Well, it could be depending on where you are in the world. And those are 6 words that are not strict. They don't tell you how to do it. They just bring to your mind the way toward a little better health. And then talking about it is taking baby steps, start where you're at. If it's a nutrition thing that you want to focus on, then we focus on one thing. We don't focus on the overhaul. We focus on one thing and we get good at it. That's how we teach our children, right? It's about small things. And you know what? They grow. It's just like relationships. You focus, you put attention to it, you put time to it, you listen, you get feedback, you change if you need to, and little by little, that's how we tackle that. So that's the basics of it. There's so much to it, of course, but not to make it difficult. It's taking one thing. If you did one new thing a week, that would be 52 changes in a year. That's too much. I mean, think about that. Like, so I like working in numbers. I like the idea of currency. I like math and science. And, we're a community. We can do it together. We're faced with very similar things. If we start talking with each other, we see that there's other people like us. And some have some tips, some have things they've left behind, and we can also as a community grow and learn, and that's how we can become well, and live a well-lived life.
Of course, and beautifully stated. And just for my audience and me at home, could you repeat those 6 words again?
Sure. Eat well, move daily, be healthy.
I love that. That's amazing. And you are married to an Armenian, and I'm sure he has told you that the Mediterranean diet is the healthiest diet in the world, just because it's so vegetables based, greens based, rice based, poultry based. I mean, you pretty much cover all the healthy food groups, right? But talk to me about your family. You have a 6.5-year old, but you have a Lithuanian background. Your husband's Armenian. So talk to me about what your family means to you from a relationship building perspective, and how much when you first met your husband, I'm sure when he learned more about your professional background, he quickly learned how much you care about health and wellness and nutrition and having the right diet and exercising and all of that. So I'm sure he found it to be fascinating.
Well, I'll set that record a little bit straight in a really fun way, Garrett, because my husband and I met in summer camp when we were teenagers. So we did not know our paths ahead would align so beautifully because he works in the health space as well.
Really?
Though some of those tenets definitely held true. I was to this day, blueberries and tacos are my two favorite foods, and he knew it even then. So we knew these things about, and we cared deeply about sport and health, but at a teenage level because we've been together 38 years, something like that. So we got married, let's see, 38 and 27. It's like 27 years ago. Yes, 27 years ago. I think I get my numbers right. That's important, for us to do. But so I have been part of their family and him part of mine. We've been up since kids, basically. And I think that while we're not deeply tied into our heritage communities directly, I'm deeply tied into my heritage in general. In fact, my grandfather, he was a farm veterinarian, my great grandfather above him from Michigan. And in his retirement years, he became the family genealogist. And he would, go back in time. He wrote like 5 books on the family and generations, which, Lithuania on my father's side to an extent, on my mother's side, it was Germany and Ireland and deep dives. I even visited my 11th great grandfather's house at one point, which is still barely standing in Virginia,
Wow.
Timberland, Virginia, back in the day. So a wide and meandering path as many. And then some have come to the US just in a couple generations ago, So the mosaic or salad bowl that has become my family story is hugely important to how I live in my life, including my chosen family, which I find to be, in this day and age, the people who really matter as much. They're the ones down the street that you feel like you are sisters and brothers and uncles and aunts too, and really care for each other, back to the relationship part. But I think it's been a neat journey for my husband and I because we didn't know these things about each other, but we must have kind of, because as we sort of moved along our independent paths, and we're both still even very independent minded, we found that our paths came closer and ran more parallel together than apart, which is, the making hopefully of a great relationship that takes work, as we know, like all good things. So that's the story of my family in short. And I just told this story actually on a podcast episode last week about my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, Grandma June. My daughter has one of her middle names is Juniper after my grandmother. And my grandmother she had 5 kids and 4 lived to adulthood, but she lived a life of service, of volunteering. She helped my grandfather, who was this farm veterinarian. They had a clinic, raised a family, was the den parent, mother, even just raising the family. It's like you're giving back, but a life of service. When she retired into a retirement community, as so many do these days, filled out all the paperwork, did all the financials, what all the stuff of today, it came to the line about volunteering. And it said, so it was getting to know like you as what do you love to do, your hobbies? Because this is one of the the first times again that the senior communities typically will go back together and sort of as if they were in elementary school again or grade school, like and meet people outside of their circles. So they get to know you again. And under the line about volunteering, it says, is there something interesting that you would like to volunteer on behalf of our community here? And what she wrote, which made me laugh and it might surprise you, she wrote, been there, done that. And that's what she wrote. And I laughed when she told the story. I share that story widely because we come from a family that cares about others and family. And she continued to care. Her spirit of it was there, but the formalized volunteering, left the building. That left the building. But she was wise enough at that point to like put wit to it. So that's a peek behind the door into my family, which are funny folks, big thinkers, big lovers, big service-oriented individuals that I adore. Those that have passed as well as those that are with me still.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that, and I love learning more about your family's background and what they mean to you and how they've inspired you. And I love the genealogy of people's backgrounds, and I think that's so cool because you also have to have an appreciation for history too, the history of your family. But I want to really thank you again for your time, being with me. And any final thoughts as an entrepreneur? You're also a book author. Feel free to, with the remaining minute or two that we have left, talk about the books you've written, the works that you've contributed. But any final thoughts on what relationship building means to you in a team environment before we depart from our interview?
Yeah, I think the concept of being better together is really one that is, and by better together, I mean it in every sense, not just 2 plus 2 equals 4, but it's like 2 plus 2 equals like infinite possibilities there on growth and amplification. And I think the combination of recognizing that and intersecting that with our waking minutes, really like how do we choose to spend our time, our life's currency? And there's evidence to show that we gain from the collaboration and contributions that we make to others, with others, to our community, and so forth. And that even the small gestures, the moments of service, how we care through food, through movement, through, walking a dog or knocking on the door of a neighbor. Maybe we don't hide next time when the doorbell rings and we open it like my grandmother used to say, and it's dinner time. No, not it's dinner, excuse me, we got to eat, but like let's pull up a chair type of attitude. Thinking about how we connect, how that can shape our health, making that connection. How we connect shapes our health and shapes our happiness. So my hope would be that we all sort of share a little bit of that spirit, hopefully that brought to your show today, to help our own personal vitality, because it's okay to be, self-care is not selfish. It's about caring for yourself so you're better for yourself and for others. So, that's where I think that I'd like to land on the idea about relationships being more than getting where you need to go or important along the path, but really, really critical to our ability to be human on this planet and vital during our awake years while we're alive.
Well, that's well said, and thank you so much, Wendy Bazilian. Wendy, it was a pleasure speaking with you and speaking about relationship building, and it's so complementary in the essence of better together, right? So I appreciate you saying all that. And Wendy Bazilian, my 79th guest on the WaveCapital's guest speaker series on relationship building in a team environment. It was a pleasure having you on today. I look forward to our interview airing, and thank you so much again for your time. I really enjoyed our conversation today.
I appreciate you. Thank you, Garrett.
Thank you so much, Wendy. You have a wonderful rest of your day.